Hello, I'm Professor Stuart Sime. I'm the Programme Director at City Law School on the Bar Professional Training course. So you know where I come from. I was at the Treasury Solicitors actually back in the 1980s, but my chambers did only civil and commercial work, and I did that for about 11 years, and I've been teaching at City Law School more recently. I've been the Programme Director for about the last 10 years, something like that. What I want to talk about today basically is about applying for the Bar Professional Training course and also applying for Pupillage. And then, secondly, I will talk about the bar course itself and give you some key dates. There's a handout of PowerPoint slides, some of which are a little bit small. I was a little bit challenged by one or two of them myself when I was having a look at them this morning. But basically, as you probably know, in order to join the profession, you need to go through a number of hoops which are set out in the second slide, which are basically you have to have a qualifying law degree or its equivalent, a GDL. Then you've got to, if you're sensible, apply for an in scholarship. Their dates are in November, so for people starting in September 2016, that's already gone by. But if you're applying the year after, first thing after coming back after the summer, apply for in scholarships. Then you've got to apply to join the BPTC. That tends to happen December/early January, but it's still open. More on that in a moment or two. Apply for pupillage. Well, there's two ways of doing that. You can do it with individual sets, but some of them are in the gateway, and they have an opening date which is the 4th of April, so that's coming up pretty soon. You need to join in. So if you're joining the BPTC in September, their closing date for receipt of your application to join is the last day in May, so you've got a couple of months for that. And also, if you want to be on the bar course, your English language must be at a particular level, which is basically fluency in English, and that can be tested in a couple of ways. I've got a slide on that in a moment. And there's also a bar aptitude test, more on that also. So the bar application system, this is done online. It's called Bar SAS, which sounds very militaristic, doesn't it? But I think it means Student Application System, Bar Student Application System. There's a 5-page user guide, and I've brought along this document. It's not all that fearsome. It's available on the relevant website, and it explains basically the mechanics for using the system. But once you get into it, you'll realise there's an online form that needs to be completed, and the first round applications all closed off in early January. So at the moment, given that we're in early March, what's happening is that the students who applied in the first round are receiving offers from the providers that they selected, and students have until the 4th of April, that date again, to consider whether or not to accept one of their offers. And basically this is just pure contract. You're getting an offer from a provider which you accept, and as we all know, offer plus acceptance equals a contract. For students who haven't applied yet, there is a second round of applications, and you can register online right now. And what happens is that students who didn't get a first round offer are reconsidered in the second round, and what happens is that their 4th, 5th and 6th preferences are considered in the second round, and of course students who didn't apply by the original deadline, their applications are considered as well. And second round offers are sent out in around about the second half of April. So the first date it could be is the 14th of April 2016 for a start in September 2016. Everyone has to provide 2 referees. We demand at least 1 academic referee, though the preference is for 2. And if your referees haven't yet put in a reference for you, they are reminded by email, and sometimes you need to chivvy them along to make sure that they do so. No references, no offer of a place. Now on my 4th slide, I've got a reference to the 2 BSB pre-admission requirements. The first one is that English language must be at 7.5 on the IELTS scale or 73 on the Pearson scale. Now, so that basically means fluent. And students will either be told that they need to sign a declaration on registration that their English language proficiency is at that level. And of course, people who have been to UK universities, born and educated in England, they're almost certainly way above that, by the way. But if there's any doubt whatsoever, the advice is to take the test in advance so that you've got a piece of paper to prove that your English language is at the required state. The other test that people, or thing you have to comply with, is the aptitude test, sometimes called BCAT. It's the bar aptitude test, administered by Pearson VUE. It's a bit like going along and doing your driving test theory part of the test. And it takes most students around about 40 minutes. I think that the maximum you're allowed is 55 minutes to do so. It's a critical reasoning test. And it's in place basically to make sure that you are thinking logically, so thinking a bit like a lawyer, so as to give you a little bit of a preview as to whether or not you're going to be sort of having the right sort of thought patterns to be successful as a lawyer. Okay, that's basically the application system. Pupillage. I've got a couple of slides down the bottom, which I just wanted to talk about a little bit. I used to chair my pupillage committee, and we used to get 200, 250 applicants for 2 pupillages, and that sounds like it's like devastatingly difficult or impossible to get a pupillage. What these figures actually show, these are again Bar Standards Board figures, is the first little set of graphs show the number of pupillages that have been available over the last 5 years. And if you look at it very, very carefully, I know the print's almost unreadable, it shows that around about 450 pupillages, first 6 pupillages and second 6, about 450 pupillages each year. What the Bar has also worked out is that the people looking for pupillage come from EU or UK domiciled backgrounds. People from further overseas basically don't get pupillages in England and Wales. There's been about 5 per year from outside those areas each year for the last 3 years. And what the figures at the bottom show are the number of BPTC students who come from the UK/EU. And you can see it's fallen from about 1,100 3 years ago. That was actually 2011, 12, by the way, and down to 769 in the most recent year, 2012, 13, 14, I think it was. And if you apply that to the number of pupillages available, in the past it was around about 40 to 45% of people were getting pupillage. If you look at the more recent figures, it's around about 58% getting pupillage. And the reason is that obviously there are a large number of sets around the country, each of them recruiting their 2 or 3 pupils. Ultimately, it's around about those sorts of percentages who are successful. The last one on that slide are basically pupillage success rates by various providers. So the ones with the big skyscrapers are basically the 3 London providers. My one's the one in the middle, BPP's on the left, University of Law is the larger one on the right of the middle set of figures, and they may be useful for you as well. Then over the page I've got some notes on what chambers are actually looking for. And I would say basically they're looking for bright, committed people who have the right skill set for their area of work. They have demanding work with clients, obviously, who need a high-quality service. Everyone's trying to recruit the best. And you've got to make it clear that that is who you are, the best candidate for this particular set of chambers. And I think that's really what this event generally today is all about. So I won't say anything more about that. I'll just talk very briefly about the bar course itself. Being a barrister is basically a twofold profession. There is the traditional advocacy part of it. You know, all the films showing the barristers in their wigs and their gowns representing people in court. And that is a big part of being a barrister. The second part of being a barrister is consultancy work, behind the scenes in chambers, advising clients on the law, the way in which the courts are likely to be dealing with their case, strengthening the case that they actually have by giving good advice to the solicitors on how to prepare adequately for the trial when it eventually comes. And the BPTC is essentially trying to equip students for those types of work, that type of work. So it divides into a set of skills. Obviously, advocacy, I'd say, is at the top of. Probably all the bar schools are really advocacy schools. But also you need to be able to conduct conferences, you need to do high-quality written work in opinions and drafts as well. The other part of it is that you've got to know your way around the court system. And so you can see the first slide on the second page. There are other subjects. So there's things like criminal litigation, sentencing powers, the rules of evidence, civil procedure. Also things like arbitration and mediation, ADR. People need to know about that these days. Professional ethics is really important. If you lie to the judge, that does not go down well with the profession. And also what the bar course tries to do is to put into the sort of context where you will be practicing in due course the skills that you have been developing. So in the last part of the course, the third term, students choose 2 options, and those are again, heavily skills-based, but you're applying opinion writing, advocacy, etc., in specialist areas. How are you trained? Well, the providers differ a little bit about this. Some do and some don't believe in live lectures. All have very good quality materials. So I've brought along this, which is the advocacy manual, which is issued to our bar students. You can see it's quite a chunky book. So basically what we try to do initially is to tell you how in theory something should be done. Then what happens is you have small groups, and in advance of a small group, you will get a set of instructions, rather like the sort of papers you would get as a pupil or as a very junior tenant. And your homework for the small group is to prepare as if you were preparing for court or for the piece of legal work that you would be asked to do as a barrister. And then you have your small group itself, where you display what you have done. And you will present a case, you will cross-examine a witness, you will show your tutor a piece of written work, and you will receive feedback on what you have done. Things which are like soft skills, think about music, acting, dance, and all sort of things, sports. Basically, you have to practice, you have to learn from your coaches, and you need to improve based on the feedback that you get. And in that way, students actually develop very, very quickly the skills that are needed for successful professional practice. And just to finish off, you can see the last two slides, basically a number of technical bits of information, key dates and deadlines, and also the key website addresses where you can get further information. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ciar McAndrew, and I am currently a student on the BPTC at BPP. So in that sense, I imagine not very much further on than many of you in the room, and I think the point of my talk is just to give you a bit of my personal experience about why I chose BPP and what I found about the BPTC when I got there. Just a little bit about my background. My undergrad and graduate studies were both in law. I subsequently took 2 years out to work in the market research industry, and now I'm back on the track with law and facing my BPTC exams, which are starting next week. We've got the dreaded professional ethics, which Stuart just mentioned, so I'm currently becoming very familiar with the BSB's code of conduct in every waking moment. In terms of how to choose your BPTC provider, my honest opinion is that there's not too much to distinguish between the different institutions available. As Stuart's explained, there are a range of different subjects which are taught on the BPTC, and much of that this comes from a centrally set syllabus. So the scope for which the institutions have for teaching different material in different ways is relatively limited. So I would say ultimately don't worry too much about where you end up, but then on the other side, there are some small things which do distinguish the providers, and it was on the basis of those small things that I made the decision to go to BPP. So taking a first example, advocacy. So Stuart's explained the way advocacy works. We all want to do advocacy. It's one of the great things, hopefully, about our future careers as barristers, and it's really good fun on the BPTC. It's one of my favourite modules. And it is taught in slightly different ways. So my understanding is that the different institutions teach it in differently sized groups. So where I go at BPP, we do advocacy in groups of 4 students, whereas in some other institutions, advocacy might be taught in groups of 6 students. Now, it doesn't sound like too much, but I think it's actually quite beneficial to have your advocacy training in as small a group as possible, for a number of reasons. Firstly, it makes it harder, more challenging. It's more difficult to do your application for an interim injunction if you've only heard 1 or 2 people doing it before you than if you've heard 4 or 5 people had a go and you've managed to pick up all their mistakes and you kind of slip under the radar slightly a little bit. In addition, you also get more feedback time. So if there's only 4 students in the class, the tutor has a greater opportunity to critique you, give you positive feedback, and tell you where you might want to improve. And lastly, at BPP, your advocacy classes rotate. So I am paired up with a buddy. I stick with my buddy for the entire year, but me and my buddy rotate through groups with other pairs of buddies. And so I get exposure to, in total, 12 different students. I get to look at their different advocacy styles, learn from them. They critique me, I critique them. overall, I think it's a pretty good experience for improving your advocacy skills. And in addition, we rotate tutors, i.e. judges, which is another great thing because you'll find when you start doing the BPTC that some judges are extremely interventionist. You've barely opened your mouth before they're asking you to forget about your first 2 submissions and please just move on to the last one. That's the only one that I'm interested in. And then you've got the other judges, which are as hard to deal with, who say absolutely nothing, don't give you any hint about how you're doing, and then in the end drop kind of a killer question on you that undermines everything you've said. So the BPP advocacy module, I've felt, has been a good way in getting the variation that you need in order to become a really good advocate. Another small thing that distinguishes the BPTC courses from each other is the options that they provide. It's really worth looking at what options your chosen or your favourite provider might give you, because they do differ from provider to provider, and it's obviously worth trying to pick the options that are going to interest you most. So for example, at BPP, I know that they, unlike some of the other providers, do a judicial review module. So I'm really interested in public law. I've worked for some public NGOs, and I really want to go into that area of practice, and so therefore it was an obvious choice to pick the provider which was going to give me some basic skills in, for example, how to fill out a claim form for permission for judicial review. I think the City Law School, my 2 flatmates at the moment, they're doing a pro bono option where they have the chance to represent claimants in front of either the Employment Tribunal or the Social Security Tribunal as part of the kind of free representation unit, and they've really enjoyed that, and that's a great way, if you're interested in pro bono, in building that into your BPTC experience. And then finally, if despite both those things you're still not sure about where to go, I would say literally go and have a look around the institutions. My experience is that the tutors are extremely friendly. They are happy to have you in for half an hour, show you around, show you the classrooms, show you the library, show you the communal areas, and you'll just get a feel, see if you like the institution. When I went into BPP, I really liked it, and I think that just kind of confirmed my decision. So that's how to choose your provider, a few tips. When you actually get there, I've got a few more tips for you. And these are just really things that I've found useful to bear in mind as I've went along. They're things that I kind of wish that I'd been told this time last year. So hopefully they're helpful. The first one is one that I think you will be repeated to you again and again and again throughout your BPTC career, but it's one that is really important to remember, and its importance isn't diminished by the repetition, and it's consolidate as you go. There is a huge amount of knowledge to get under your belt on the BPTC, and if you don't kind of revise your notes at the end of every class, then you're going to get to the position when you're facing your exams where you've got basically 2 huge volumes of the white book to get on top of, no notes, and you'll be wishing that you had consolidated right from day one. I know it's boring, I know it's a bit of a predictable tip, but it's really, really important. The other tip that I've got for managing your time on the BPTC is to bear in mind that the attendance requirements are really strict. This wasn't something that I really understood before I started on the BPTC, but you absolutely have to attend at least 90% of your classes, and if you don't, it puts your ability to pass the BPTC into serious question. Now, in a practical sense, this basically means you're going to have to attend all your classes, maybe missing between 10 and 15, which is not a lot. So imagine that you're legitimately ill a couple of times, you've got a mini pupillage which takes up a week, that's 5 classes gone, and that kind of margin starts to diminish quite quickly. So what I would say is plan your time really carefully. If you're planning mini pupillages, try and understand when your reading weeks are, try and slot them in there. Some institutions, it's possible for you to have your BPTC classes over 3 days rather than 5 days. You can always request, it might not happen, but I requested a 3-day week at BPP and I was fortunate enough to get that. And that means then if you can fit your mini pupillages into 3 days on the week, you only have to take 1 day off your classes, and that means you run much less risk of falling foul of the minimum attendance requirements. And in addition to your studies, the BPTC is really intensive, but there are loads of other things that you can get involved in. And it's also worthwhile looking at the pro bono institutes that are attached to the various BPTC providers. So at BPP, for example, there's quite a thriving pro bono institute. I currently volunteer for the employment law telephone advice line. Roughly about once a fortnight, I go to the pro bono office. We get messages from clients about employment law issues. I call them up, I take down the details of their problem, summarise their case, and then we pass it on to a volunteer lawyer who gives them a call on a weekday evening and gives them some free advice, basically, which is a really good way to get involved. It looks great on your CV. The time commitment's not too great, and you learn quite a bit about employment law as you go. I know that City, along with BPP, does another great pro bono programme, which is the School Exclusions Project, which is essentially young people who've been excluded from school who need some representation when it comes to their final hearing before the Board of Governors as to whether they should get removed from school or not. And that's another great way of getting involved with pro bono alongside your BPTC studies. There's loads of great advocacy opportunities outside the classroom at all the providers. There are internal moots. Your BPTC provider will put you, will disseminate knowledge about external moots that you can get involved in. And there's also your IN, which is a great resource throughout your BPTC year. Really look at which IN you're going to join. Think about the advocacy opportunities that they've got for you. For example, I am at Lincoln's Inn, and alongside my BPTC this year, I have been on an advocacy weekend. It was a residential weekend at a country home. So in addition to great food and great wine, you also get an opportunity to practice your advocacy in front of High Court judges, very experienced QCs, and it's a really great way to really learn what a judge is looking for from you when you're in the courtroom. And the Inns also do a huge range of other advocacy competitions. So, for example, I recently was in a competition where we had to do a plea in mitigation on behalf of famous fictional characters. So a plea in mitigation is where your client's been sentenced, and you're basically saying, can we have as low a sentence as possible, because all in all, he's not such a bad guy. So I had to stand up and explain why Willy Wonka should get a reduced sentence for his crimes of cruelty to children, which was an interesting experience, but really fun and really worth doing. So my message is, think carefully about where you want to do the BPTC. Once you're there, make the most of your time, because it's quite a time-pressured year, and alongside it, take the opportunity to enjoy, get involved in some pro bono activities, and I think you'll have a great year. And if you've got any questions about my experience, then just please ask.